I'll tell you something, a confession, this doesn't get any easier. I warn that there are very disturbing developments on foot in so-called democratic societies. We've seen that in response to this virus, where we knew who the vulnerable cohort were, and as I've been the lone voice saying, 99% of all cases are mild, but we've generated fear and anxiety, and the metaphor now is millions of people walking around with masks on. Don't worry about the epidemiological experts who tell you for people without an infection or in the outdoors, masks are completely unnecessary. But masks are all Joe Biden knows, so he's going to mandate the use of masks. Like Andrews. Come to Victoria over Christmas, Andrews says. We'll be open for tourism. Oh, and by the way, in boiling heat, you'll have to wear a mask 24 hours a day, or the mask police will get you. Democracy, as we once knew it, is under siege, and so are our freedoms. Which brings me to this American election again. We call America the leader of the free world. But if liberty means anything, it means the right to tell people what they may not want to hear. Yet now, anyone who dares suggest that Biden may not have won this election fairly runs the risk of significant punitive sanctions, being shut down. A parent sent me a message last night, and I quote, "How has the world come to this? My daughter is too frightened to say anything about Trump. Teachers tell her he's evil and a very bad person, so my daughter won't stand up for him. Girls in her class would go around the school saying, she likes Trump. This is not Australian." He said to me, the dad, "Is this disgraceful?" Well, of course it's disgraceful. But now, dare to argue that reported irregularities in the presidential election need to be checked, and the response is, these allegations are false, they're baseless, they are a conspiracy. People like Miranda Devine have shown real guts. And as she rightly points out today in the New York Post, in 5 swing states, with Biden in the lead, the margin is 1% or less. Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania and Nevada. It's not as though electoral fraud is unknown in America. In 1960, as Miranda points out, when Chicago Mayor Richard Daley allegedly rigged the ballot for John F. Kennedy, dead people were found to have voted and 677 election officials were indicted. Now, because of coronavirus, tens of millions of votes were cast by mail, double what occurred in 2016. The New York Times, who've done nothing but vilify Trump, apparently forget that they once reported that mail-in voting is the most vulnerable to fraud. So why, it must be asked, do those who seek to raise these issues, rather than have such issues taken seriously, those who raise them are denigrated and attempts are made to silence them? Shouldn't an honest media, as opposed to a biased media, investigate the concerns? Rudolph Giuliani is the former mayor of New York, a former politician. He heads Trump's legal team. He has said that Trump will press on with this election challenge. At a press conference in Philadelphia at the weekend, Giuliani said, and I quote, "Trump's not going to concede when at least 600,000 ballots are in question, because," Giuliani said, "they were counted without any poll watchers observing to ensure they were legitimate." Giuliani argues that in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and I quote, 50 to 60 poll watchers will all testify that they were uniformly deprived of their right to inspect any single part of the mail-in ballots. Not a single one was inspected, as the law requires. Even when a court order was obtained to allow the Republican inspectors to get 6 feet closer, they moved the people counting the ballots 6 further feet away, says Giuliani. Quote, "It is really simple. If you've got nothing to hide with these mail-in ballots, you'll allow inspection," unquote. Well, Giuliani will file one lawsuit today and others by the end of the week. As Miranda reports today, another Trump team lawyer, Sidney Powell, a lady, claimed yesterday that 450,000 ballots had been found with only votes for Biden and no down ballot selections. Now, that means no other name marked on the ballot paper. The lawyer, Sidney Powell, in an understatement, regarded that as suspicious. Said Giuliani, talking about Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and their sad history of voter fraud, he said, quote, "Will Smith's father has voted here twice since he died. I don't know who he voted for because the vote is secret. In Philadelphia, they keep the votes of dead people secret," he joked laconically. And as Trump's campaign advisor, Corey Lewandowski, argued, and I quote, "This is not anecdotal, this is hard evidence. And if you do your jobs in the media, you'll find additional examples," unquote. He added, the same thing was done in Georgia, the same thing was done in Michigan, the same thing was done in North Carolina, When Giuliani spoke, he was joined on the podium by poll watchers, several of whom provided on-the-record statements accusing Democratic officials in Philadelphia of not allowing them to properly observe the ballots. As Miranda reports today, the Trump team lawyer Sidney Powell has claimed in an interview that two pieces of software, and I alluded to this last night, called Hammer and Scorecard, were used to flip votes from Trump to Biden in some ballots. Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican, is chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He has said in a statement that he will be investigating, quote, all credible allegations of voting irregularities and misconduct, unquote. He's received a sworn affidavit from a Pennsylvania postal worker, Richard Hopkins, alleging that Erie postmaster Robert Weisenbach had told workers that he was, quote, backdating the postmarks on the ballots to make it appear as though the ballots had been collected on November 3, 2020, despite them in fact being collected on November 4 and possibly later, unquote. Of course, Pennsylvania has been declared for Biden, which gets him over the 270. But if observers were kept away from the ballot counting room, where mail-in ballots were being counted, and if 135,000 of them were counted, none of which were observed by any Republican observer, as the law requires, and if the same situation occurred in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, where are the media asking questions? Giuliani, on behalf of Trump, will be submitting a lawsuit about, quote, violating civil rights, conducting an unfair election, and violating the law of the state, and arguing that, quote, 450,000 ballots were removed from their envelopes and, quote unquote, validated, but without any Republican observations, unquote. Well, the Trump derangement syndrome continues. What we've seen for 4 years, we see now, as if Trump is some election villain trying to delay the inevitable. The reality of this happening is not unprecedented. Again, Miranda Devine courageously argues that it took 37 days for the legal battles to be sorted out after the 2000 election, 37 days before George W. Bush was declared the winner. Well, may we ask why this unseemly rush now for Biden to declare victory as he did last Saturday. And, of course, his son, Hunter Biden, currently under FBI investigation, was on stage with him. I don't imagine the Trump team are playing cards, by the way, with one another. Their silence is a measure of the fact that some serious homework is being done, and that is my understanding. Electoral fraud is not unknown in America. This election is down to about 120,000 votes out of almost 150 million that have been cast. Honest media would investigate all of this rather than argue that it's a conspiracy. But then, as I've said many times, any tactic is an acceptable tactic so long as Trump is beaten. I repeat what I said at the beginning. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they don't want to hear. The Trump haters don't want to hear that all may not be well in the world of Biden. And while they're at it, they might ask some questions about Biden and China, eh? Biden and Ukraine. To surrender truth in order to prosecute your ideological hatred of someone leads us into a world far removed from democracy. What do you think? Email me, alan@skynews.com.au, or the text line 0414 000 848.